Good morning. Full house for our first time. This is great. It's good to be back with you. Last night was a moment in our state's history when I put on the table a plan to move us forward, for both sides to come out of our trenches, as I put it, and meet the needs of Alaska's kids in creating new opportunities in education, as well as increasing funding for education. And just to remind folks of what is already in the hopper so far, our budget proposal fully funded the K-12 formula, forward-funded education for the next year after that. We put $5 million in our budget for a digital teaching initiative. We put the $25 million in for energy assistance to schools. And then last year we opened up residential school applications within the Department of Education and approved 4 new residential schools, and I've requested funding for those. And then last night in my speech, I set forward a group of initiatives that I proposed, and let me just kind of put it in context. So my hope is that this Friday we'll be able to introduce an omnibus education bill that includes those elements that I spoke to last night. So, for example, new charter school opportunities, residential schools funding in that application period, new career technical opportunities, testing out for course credit, eliminating and replacing the high school graduation qualifying exam and replacing it with ACT and SAT and work keys, as well as a BSA increase for 3 years. And that's the education package in addition to what we already have in and have proposed that we will put on the table for discussion by legislators. The second big topic that I discussed was gas line. And we focused on getting gas to Alaskans first and then to markets beyond. We'll be introducing a bill that we're asking legislators to take up. That bill would establish an AGDC subsidiary to pursue state equity interests. The bill would give authority for DNR and revenue to participate in negotiations in this pre-feed stage of the gas line project that I've described. There would be in it a proposal to change the gas production tax from a net tax to a gross tax, which will help prevent gaming of the system and hopefully litigation across the years that we had with the oil pipeline. All that, and we will keep AGDC in the hunt for its open season on the ASAP project as a backstop to this Alaska LNG project. Those were 2 of the largest points I put forward, but I also put forward a third one. And if you'll notice, all 3 of these areas are areas where Republicans and Democrats can come together and work for Alaska's greater good. The third area, besides education, gas line, was this unfunded pension liability. The single biggest cost driver in the state. I think we can address that together here and provide a better foundation for our kids' future and not let their education dollars be squeezed even further by one line item in the budget where we have to write an annual check to fund this pension liability. So instead of paying $1.1 billion some years from now, paying $500 million by front-loading the pension retirement system now while we have money and budget reserves to do it. So those were the big topics, and I put it all in the context of courageous and compassionate Alaskans and how they set the bar high. And I think that's what I had to do last night, was set the bar high for us as a legislature and executive in terms of our responsibilities to the people, but also provide a path forward and be willing to reach across the aisle and say, let's work together for the good of Alaska. So that's what I attempted to do last night, and happy to take your questions. Becky.
Becky Bohr, the Associated Press. Governor, there's been some confusion today among folks or people wanting to get a better sense. You had some curious phrasing or some phrasing that left some room for interpretation on if you work with me to pass what you called real education reform, I will work to support a BSA increase.
Mhm.
It sounds like the BSA increase will be part of your omnibus bill. So are you viewing it as a take it or leave it package, or what would constitute in your mind the real education reform that would allow you to feel that you could support a BSA increase?
So real education reform means more opportunity for our kids. It means more parental choice and options for our kids. And that comes in a multitude of forms. The bill that I will put forward on Friday for introduction will contain this list of about 6 items, including the BSA increase.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would constitute real reform. And I would sign a bill. You know, if they took it as I put it in, I would sign that bill. But this is an iterative process and a public process where the legislators get to have their say and get to represent their constituencies, and we get to understand what's in the legislation and make it better across time. I did raise the issue of the constitutional amendment as another way to give parents more choice in education. That's a discussion that I think is long overdue. And if we can't have a discussion about it in these halls because we're afraid to confront it or because it's so challenging, then we probably ought to be in a different business. And so that's a little bit of the framework I've got at this point.
But is there, I understand that the things go through the legislative process and get changed, but is there a minimum level of reform that you would accept to also accept a BSA increase?
Well, so I turned the question around a little bit and answered it by saying, if they take what I propose, I'd be happy to sign this bill, because I'm not going to put forward something that I don't believe will make a difference. At the same time, I don't have that expectation, nor should they. They should question it. They should publicly vet it. And once they start changing the bill, it becomes a negotiation for Alaska's benefit. I mean, so for me to stand here at day 4 of the session and say anything different, it'd be difficult. So. Rhonda?
Just for clarification, if the resolution doesn't pass for the constitutional amendment on the ballot, will there be a BSA increase?
So let me come back to what I just said. I said if the bill I put in with these pieces that include a BSA increase passes, I will sign it. So what I'm doing is inviting a public conversation. The folks on the other side of the table who have forever said BSA increase, and a couple still sound intransigent in response to your media inquiries, I've stepped forward and said I'll put a BSA increase in on top of the increases we've already put forward, and let's have a discussion about what will bring more opportunity to kids and what that looks like, including my willingness to sign up to spend even more money and put more increases in than we have been.
I just want to clarify so I understand. The BSA, the resolution is separate from your omnibus.
That's correct. Yeah, because there are 8 legislators on the House and Senate side who have sponsored that legislation. What I did is said, I support having that discussion. Let's move it.
Because some of the things that the Democrats have said in reacting to your speech last night is they felt like they were being bribed, that their vote, that the BSA was contingent on the resolution getting out of the legislature.
So the art of representing constituencies in this building is the art of compromise. And what I've seen is the side of the table that focuses on results for spending has been, like myself, has been unwilling to say we're going to automatically program an increase every year with a BSA increase, while the other side of the table have said BSA increase without having any new opportunities for kids and no level of accountability. That's one view of it, okay? And so what I've said is, let's quit sitting in our trenches, lobbing grenades across, and let's have a discussion. And I will lead it, and by saying I will step forward and have a BSA increase with more educational opportunity for our kids. It's got to be tied to more educational opportunity for our kids, and that's how I approached it. Was let's have this discussion. Wait, we got to go back. Yeah, Adam.
2 questions on education. First, do you know, is it too early, or do you know how much of an increase the BSA would receive, providing that you get signed the bill?
So I'm considering several right now, and I've not seen the final bill. I will likely within the next 24 hours. It'll be available, as I understand it, Friday when it's read across both floors.
And also, let's assume that some of the school choice stuff goes through, and how is accountability built into it? I mean, how could another school that a parent puts his or her child into, besides public schools, how are they going to be held accountable to make sure that child gets a decent education?
So what you're really asking is whether the parent can be trusted with the child's education more than the government can. And I think the parent can be trusted with the child's education, with directing the child's education. In the package I've proposed, however, and what I'm proposing, the charter school opportunities, the residential schools, that accountability is already all built into that. I just want more options. Like I mentioned last night, the Aquarian Charter School, waiting list, almost 800 kids right now, last week anyway. We got to be able to replicate that. We shouldn't have a waiting list with 800 kids. We ought to be asking, why is that? What are they doing right, and how come we're not replicating it? So, and then when you went back to I think you kind of started on the SJR 9 question, on the constitutional amendment question. How do you hold people accountable? So that is really, as I understand it, a 2-stage process. One is to say yes or no, should parents have greater choice under Alaska's Constitution? If they say yes, then a second piece of legislation would have to be passed defining what that looks like. So for people to make assumptions about what it would look like before that second piece of legislation passes would be premature. Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, Senator Mike Dunleavy, who introduced SDR 9 in the first place, said that his reasons for doing so were because correspondence students were already spending money on some sort of private tutoring and religious, sometimes courses from religious classes that might have Latin that they can't get. So that was kind of a small board fix, but there still hasn't really been a discussion of what the bigger idea after SGR and I would be. If we're looking at kind of small board fixes, is that something that you see necessary for, is that why you think SGR and I is necessary? What's your vision after that resolution passes and it does?
My vision is greater educational opportunity and choices for parents of their kids. And I don't think we have a system that maximizes that opportunity, and I want to provide every opportunity for it. So I think that's an ongoing discussion on what shape that takes. Rich.
Yeah, thanks, Governor. Rich Malrankers, Daily News. I'll ask a similar question, slightly different way. Is SJR 9, in your mind, part of is that essential reform, school reform, that would engender a BSA increase, or is that different?
I think so. I actually separate the question.
Okay.
I think it's important for Alaskans to decide this issue, and I made that very clear by raising it in the State of the State. I've also made very clear today, if my package passes that I'm proposing with the BSA increase, I would sign both.
So
But I want to have that discussion. I think Alaskans deserve it.
But it's discontinued. It's not directly linked to the BSA increase in your mind.
Is it? It's linked because it creates more opportunity. But is it a requirement?
Yeah.
No. But it becomes part of the negotiation once they move away from my proposal. I mean, so we're at this place now where I can tell you at this moment, no, it's not. It doesn't have to pass. But I think it's important to have that discussion.
If BSA funding is important enough to put in a bill, why is it necessary to have these other components as well? Why would you not just say, let's raise the BSA? What
Because I think that's an entrenched position that doesn't represent the other half of Alaska that wants to see more results for the spending of education, for education spending. And I see it as bringing two positions together to talk. And I felt it was my obligation now to step forward with a proposal and say, here it is, work on it, vet it, chew it up, put your own plan on the table, but we need to have this discussion and pull people out of the trenches to solve these these issues for Alaskans.
Why wait
Oh,
this
Pat.
long into your governorship to discuss the constitutional amendment? Is it because you have to have the cuts hanging over schools to get them to go along with that?
So the constitutional amendment has been around and has been talked about for some time. But last night I declared this the education session, and it is time to have that discussion. I mean, we've spent a couple years now with parties, including myself, becoming entrenched on one side or the other, results, more funding. And we're at a place now where we need to have a bigger, broader discussion and bring parties together on both. Hold it. You haven't had a question yet. Go ahead.
Jennifer Canfield, exactly how much will you propose, can you clarify how much you propose increasing the BSA?
I won't be able to do that now, but you will have it within 24 to 36 hours.
What will become of the one-time funding and spending that you proposed year after year? Will that still be part of the package?
So for instance, the 25 million energy assistance, that's still there. That's still in. The $5 million for digital teaching initiative, that's in. The increases on the formula, that's still in. So
So the list of 6 things that you're proposing,
Yeah.
will it be able to make up financially for what critics have called flat funding for the last 4 years?
So that is part of the negotiation, right? What I'm suggesting is, this is part of where everybody got entrenched, is on this discussion of what's being funded and what's not. The federal government, as the Anchorage Daily News reported, federal government has cut its funding for education in Alaska. State government funding has increased. But either side will argue that point. What I'm focusing on is, let's have the discussion on results and new funding. Bob.
Thank you, Governor. On HB 77,
Yeah.
you've had a lot of opposition to that bill. The Senate sent it to Resources, and apparently they're going to work on the bill independently, but Ed Fogels has said you're going to send down some kinds of changes. He didn't specify whether it was specific amendments or a redraft. Could you tell us 2 questions? First, what you're going to send to the legislature and when, and then also, it seems like you and he both are sort of misrepresenting the impact of the in-stream flow provision. And specifically on that, in the Daily News' interview, you said, I still believe it's in the public interest to have a public entity hold a water reservation rather than a small group of the state having total control over water that belongs to the citizens.
Yeah, or a person from California.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah, he keeps making a point about these outside people. How does anyone control water that has been reserved in a stream as in-stream flow?
Okay, let's go back to your first question. What was your first question?
First question, what kind of changes are you going to send to the legislature on HB 77?
I think I detailed that in Rich Maurer and Lisa Deemer's interview, and the DNR did a good job of listening and to the public and going around to the various stakeholders and listening. And one of the changes that I have said we will make and willing to entertain is a change to that provision where people thought DNR's authority was superseding other agencies' authority. So I have asked our department to work to make sure that provision is confined to DNR's own authority. That was, my understanding is that was the intent to begin with, but I can understand how the language might have caused concern. The second question.
You keep saying that when somebody applies for, if they ever got, a in-stream flow provision, that gives them control of whatever amount of water is subject to the in-stream flow. Who controls any amount of water if it's required to be in the stream, regardless of who applies?
I just view water as,
Outsiders versus
I think,
Alaskans.
well, I do, because 49 other states treat it differently than we do. We allow an individual to come in and have a water reservation. And that is a public resource, a public asset. It's like me saying that Bob Tkach can reserve a $30 million piece of our state treasury, which is a public resource. But you're just going to hold it. You're not going to do anything. You're just going to save it.
I don't get to hold it. It stays in the stream where anybody who gets to the stream can use it. Nobody is holding it.
No, that's not true.
Well, what is?
Commissioner Belash, would you help me out here and address that for me?
And we're just talking about in-stream flow reservations,
Go ahead.
not uses or anything.
Thank you. Joe Belash, Commissioner at DNR. The issue on reservations, Bob, is that a reservation blocks other people from using the water. So part of the debate that's gone on with regard to HB 77 is how do we address the uses of waters and competing uses of waters, whether they be temporary or permanent. A temporary water use is something that is engaged in for exploration or a temporary business that's engaged in a given
Well, I understand what that
place.
is. When you say a reservation blocks other people from using the water.
It does.
It allows anybody who approaches the stream to use the water. Your
Actually, it
temporary
does
water
not.
right and permanent
No,
rights
no.
take the
You
water out.
fundamentally misunderstand it, Bob.
One of us does.
You do.
Thank you for clarifying.
A water reservation, an in-stream flow reservation, blocks any other use of that water other than for the purpose it's been reserved. There are four
Fishing in it,
purposes.
for drinking out of it if you're thirsty.
Withdrawing water is something that if you do in a manner that is going to impact that reservation, you cannot do.
But it doesn't give me control of that water. It leaves it in the stream for everybody to control.
It is no. No, you're wrong.
Well, it doesn't give.
It blocks the
My
use.
clumsy question.
It blocks the use of. It blocks.
One entity from using it,
No, it blocks everybody from using it.
except for boating or fishing or any of the things most people do with water. I mean, all the other rights, the temporary water right and
Bob,
the
yeah,
permanent right.
Bob, you can actually go testify on it if you'd like.
We're gonna have to go
So
on.
we need to go online. Yeah.
Operator, we're ready for,
Thank you,
online
Commissioner.
Q&A.
Thank you. The lines are open. Mike, please go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, thank you so much. Just a very simple question, Governor. I wanted to know if the Bristol Bay watershed assessment that was released last week by the EPA qualifies as federal overreach, a subject that you brought up for quite a bit. And if you could expound on why it's part of the federal overreach. Thank you so much.
So the Attorney General set forth our concerns in a letter on March 9, 2012 to EPA related to its assessment. And our concern is that the EPA jumped in prematurely and without legal authority under the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act says it's the policy of Congress to preserve and protect the primary responsibilities of states to prevent pollution and to plan the development and use of land and water resources. And by the EPA stepping in at a preliminary stage, that to me encroaches on the state's right to prevent pollution and to plan the development and use of land and water resources in the context of the Clean Water Act. That's kind of the basis, but the our entire list of concerns about how the EPA approached it are in that letter of March 9, 2012. Anybody else online?
No one else is online. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Matt Buxton, Fairbanks Daily News Miner. On education, why include a PSA increase at all? You talked about the side that's asking for a PSA or money, but you know that side also has a caucus because the majority's allowing them to have a caucus right now. So, I guess do you
Nice,
personally
Matt.
believe that PSA increase is needed? Is that a position that you hold?
So I think there are multiple ways to address funding issues, and we have been working to address those by increasing the budget in different areas for education. But again, this is about two entrenched positions that I want to move forward for Alaska's good. And that's what this comes down to, is I want to see more results for our kids and more results for the people's money. I understand that the other side sees the BSA increase as the be-all, end-all to that. So I'm willing to step forward and say, I will accept something that I did not accept before, which is a way of funding, assuming we can get more opportunity, more access for our kids. So is it a change of position? Of course it is. But that's how governors lead. We make choices that bring parties together, take a step, and ask people to publicly vet these ideas. Becky.
Governor, if I could ask on a gas line
Yeah.
question. You cited a number last night that I don't remember seeing before, the state's share for the pre-feed is 70 million to 90 million.
Yeah.
What is the fund source gonna be, given we're already looking at a draw for this year of 1.9 billion and 1.1 with your proposal right now for the budget? Is that going to be money from the SBR, or what is that source going to be? And is it going to be in the current year budget? Is it going to be in next year's budget? And if it's in next year's budget, would it count against the cap?
So I'm gonna speak without having the final bill in front of you. But again, where we are today is where we've been before, and that is high oil prices have masked, declining production, and hence the lower revenue we're in now with a lower price environment. We took steps to change that, but across history, we have always managed lower oil price environments with our savings. That's what we're doing here. That's where you reference the statutory budget reserve fund. I fully expect that with legislators, if they're willing to move forward with me on reducing our pension obligation, reducing that biggest cost driver of the budget. If oil prices stay low, we are still, even with the dramatic decrease in spending, we are still going to need to draw from savings to get us through this time. That's what we did it in 1999, and we did it in 2003, and even multiple times beyond that. So I anticipate we're going to be doing that this year. The good news is, if oil prices continue lower, the More Alaska Production Act protects Alaskans better at lower oil prices. That was a key part of my legislation, to collect more revenue for Alaskans at lower oil prices. And so given that, I think you will see, I know you will see either a fiscal note attached to the bill or a budget amendment that includes the money that I described last night. Pat?
Does your residential school proposal, does that have a net cost, or net savings to it? Is there any way you can close some of those costly rural schools?
I don't have that for you. I don't know at this point. Rhonda, you've been a while too.
Yeah, I have a question about the budget impact of the Senate, the resolution that's been on the table.
Which one?
The constitutional
Okay.
amendment. The Ledge Research Services has some numbers on the impact on the Anchorage School District, and it's a bit, it would amount, if they lost 5% of their students, they'd lose $16.3 million. They also said that to pay for the tuition of private school students at the BSA rate would also be millions and millions of dollars out of it. So how can we do all these reforms that you propose, the boarding schools, increasing charter school access? And these proposals cost money, and we have a $2 billion revenue shortfall this year. So I guess how are you looking at paying for your proposals?
I think it's wrong to assume that we have to do things the same way we've always done them. And in this case, I think it's premature for anybody to put a number, and if anybody gives you a number, they're in the range of wild speculation. And I say that because, again, I talked about the two pieces of legislation. SGR 9 would have to pass, then there would be a second piece of legislation that would define what that looks like. Now, somebody could say wildly, yeah, the schools could decline dramatically in enrollment, and that they have facilities costs to maintain. That will still all get covered through the formula. At the same time, we're opening up new opportunities for kids, and I can't put a price on that. I think that's worthwhile. So, Rich.
Governor, I didn't, aside from the deposits in the pension fund, I didn't really hear a long-term fiscal plan last night. Do you anticipate the need, for instance, for income tax, sales taxes, a permanent fund over the next 5 or 10 years?
I don't.
Then why not?
Because again, we have savings to manage our way through, and we are also reducing spending along the way. So at this point, I don't assume that. I also assume that we will have new oil production bringing in new revenue. One more.
Commissioner Hanley has been very very supportive of early education initiatives like Parents as Teachers and the
Yeah.
pre-K program that exists in the state, but early education hasn't been mentioned last night or today as part of your omnibus education bill. Is there a reason for that?
No, I mean, we continue to fund it at the levels we've been funding it. I mean, certainly that's a discussion that can be had in greater detail this session. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thanks.